At 27 years old, after spending my entire adult life trying to stay invisible and safe in a world that never felt safe for people like me, I witnessed something in a warehouse that I was never meant to see, and the most dangerous man in the city looked at his men and said 5 words that would change my life forever. Keep her safe. She's mine. My name is Sophie Reyes, and this is the story of how becoming a witness to something terrible led me to the one person who would finally make me feel protected. That Friday night started like every other Friday night for the past 2 years. I was working the late shift at Marino's, a small Italian restaurant in the old part of the city that catered mostly to locals and the occasional tourist who wandered off the main streets looking for authentic food. I was a waitress, which was not exactly the career I had dreamed of when I was younger, but it paid the bills and kept me fed, and after everything I had been through in my 27 years, that was enough. The restaurant closed at 11, and by the time I finished cleaning the last tables and cashing out with Marco, the owner, it was almost midnight. Marco offered to walk me to my car like he always did, but I waved him off. My car was parked just around the corner in the small lot behind the building, and I had made this walk hundreds of times before. Besides, Marco had a wife waiting for him at home and a bad knee that was acting up again. I could handle a 2-minute walk by myself. That was my first mistake. The night was cold for October, and I pulled my jacket tighter around myself as I walked down the narrow alley that led to the parking lot. The streetlight at the end of the alley had been broken for weeks, and I made a mental note to mention it to Marco again tomorrow. The darkness did not usually bother me, but something about tonight felt different. The air was heavy with a tension I could not name, and the usual sounds of the city seemed muted, like the world was holding its breath. I was about halfway down the alley when I heard the voices. Men's voices, low and urgent, coming from somewhere ahead of me. I stopped walking, my instincts screaming at me to turn around and go back the way I had come, but curiosity, that terrible weakness that has gotten me into trouble my entire life, made me move forward instead. Just a few more steps, just enough to see what was happening. The alley opened into a small courtyard that connected to several buildings, including an old warehouse that had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. The voices were coming from inside the warehouse, through a door that was slightly ajar, spilling a rectangle of yellow light onto the cracked concrete. I should have left. I should have turned around and walked away and pretended I had never heard anything. But something made me move closer, pressing myself against the cold brick wall, peering through the gap in the doorway. What I saw made my blood freeze in my veins. There were 5 men inside the warehouse, standing in a loose circle around a 6th man who was tied to a chair. The man in the chair was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, and his face was swollen and bruised in ways that made it clear he had been beaten for some time. One of the standing men was holding a gun, not pointing it at anyone, just holding it casually at his side like it was a natural extension of his arm. And in the center of the group, giving orders in a low voice that carried absolute authority, was the most striking man I had ever seen. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with dark hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. His eyes were dark too, so dark they looked almost black in the dim light of the warehouse. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, and everything about him radiated power and danger in equal measure. I had lived in this city my entire life, and even though I had spent most of that time trying to stay out of trouble, I knew who this man was. Everyone knew who Dominic Santoro was. His family had run the organized crime operations in this city for 3 generations. His father had been the boss before him, and his grandfather before that. The Santoro name was spoken in whispers, with fear and respect and a healthy dose of terror. And here I was, hiding in an alley, watching Dominic Santoro conduct what was clearly an interrogation of someone who had made the very poor decision to cross his family. The man in the chair was crying now, begging for mercy, swearing that he had not meant to betray anyone, that it was all a misunderstanding. Dominic listened without expression, his face completely blank, and when the man finished his pleading, Dominic said something I could not hear. One of his men stepped forward and hit the tied man so hard his head snapped back. I must have made a sound, a gasp maybe, or a whimper of shock. I did not mean to, and I wasn't even aware of it until it was too late. But in the silence of that courtyard, even the smallest sound was amplified. Every head in that warehouse turned toward the door. Toward me. For one frozen moment, I stared through the gap at 5 pairs of eyes that had suddenly become aware of my existence. Then survival instinct finally kicked in and I ran. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life, my feet pounding against the concrete, my heart slamming against my ribs. Behind me, I heard shouting, heard the warehouse door bang open, heard footsteps pursuing me through the dark alley. I did not look back. I just ran, lungs burning, legs screaming, the cold air tearing at my throat with every desperate breath. I made it to the end of the alley and turned onto the street, heading for the main avenue where there might be people, might be witnesses, might be some kind of safety. But I had only gone a few steps when a black car appeared out of nowhere, screeching to a stop directly in front of me. 2 men jumped out, moving with the kind of coordinated efficiency that spoke of training and practice. Before I could change direction, before I could even scream, they had grabbed me and thrown me into the back seat of the car. The door slammed shut and the car was moving again, and I was trapped in the darkness with my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I am going to die, I thought with strange clarity. I witnessed something I should not have witnessed, and now I am going to die. The car drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 or 20 minutes. I sat in the back seat, too terrified to move, watching the city lights flash past the tinted windows and wondering if my body would ever be found. The 2 men in the front seat did not speak to me or to each other. They just drove in silence, their faces illuminated occasionally by passing streetlights, their expressions completely unreadable. When the car finally stopped, we were in front of a mansion. There is no other word for it. It was a massive stone building surrounded by iron gates and manicured gardens, the kind of place that belonged in old movies about wealthy families with dark secrets. One of the men opened my door and gestured for me to get out. When I hesitated, he said in a voice that was surprisingly gentle, "He wants to see you. He is not going to hurt you." I did not believe him, but I did not have a choice, so I got out of the car and let them lead me through the iron gates, up the stone steps, and into a house that was even more impressive on the inside than it was on the outside. They took me to a study on the 2nd floor, a room lined with books and dominated by a massive desk made of dark wood, and behind that desk, waiting for me with those dark eyes that I had seen in the warehouse, was Dominic Santoro. He gestured to the men who had brought me. "Leave us." They left without a word, closing the door behind them, and suddenly I was alone with the most dangerous man in the city, the man whose criminal operation I had just witnessed, the man who had every reason in the world to make sure I never told anyone what I had seen. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said something that surprised me completely. "Are you hurt?" I stared at him, not understanding the question. "What?" "My men, when they brought you here, did they hurt you?" "No," I managed to say. "Good." He stood up from behind his desk and walked toward me, and I took an instinctive step backward, my back hitting the closed door. He stopped, raising his hands slightly in a gesture that was clearly meant to be non-threatening. "I am not going to hurt you," he said. "Despite what you saw tonight, despite what you probably think of me, I do not hurt innocent women." "Then why am I here?" "Because you saw something you should not have seen, and now I have to decide what to do about that." My throat went dry. "What are your options?" He almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Traditionally, when someone witnesses what you witnessed tonight, there is only one option." The blood drained from my face and I felt my knees go weak. But when I looked at him, really looked at him, I did not see a killer. I saw a man who seemed almost tired, almost weary, like the weight of who he was and what he did was pressing down on him in ways he could not escape. "But you are not traditional," I said, not knowing where the words came from. He tilted his head, studying me with new interest. "What makes you say that?" "Because if you were, I would already be dead. You would not have brought me here, you would not be talking to me, you would have just made me disappear." He was quiet for a moment and something flickered in those dark eyes, something that looked almost like respect. "What is your name?" "Sophie. Sophie Reyes."
"Sophie," he said, and the way he said my name made something strange happen in my chest. "Tell me about yourself." "Why?" "Because I need to know who you are before I decide what to do with you." So I told him. I don't know why I did it, why I opened up to this man who should have terrified me, who probably should have killed me already, but something about the way he was looking at me, the way he was listening, made me feel like he actually wanted to hear what I had to say.
I told him about growing up in the poor part of the city with a mother who worked 3 jobs and a father who had left before I was old enough to remember him. I told him about dropping out of college when my mother got sick, about spending 2 years taking care of her until she died. I told him about the string of jobs I had worked since then, the apartments I had lived in, the life I had built for myself out of nothing. And I told him about the loneliness, about how I had spent my entire adult life trying to stay invisible, trying not to attract attention, trying to be safe in a world that had never felt particularly safe for someone like me. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he walked to a small table near the window and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to me. "You have had a difficult life," he said. I took the glass but did not drink. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "I make a decision. And I have made it." My hand tightened on the glass. "What decision?" "You saw something tonight that could destroy my family and everything we have built. By every rule I was raised with, I should make sure you can never tell anyone what you saw." He stepped closer to me, and I held my breath, waiting for whatever came next. "But I am not going to do that," he continued. "Instead, I am going to protect you. I do not understand. The man you saw tonight, the one we were questioning, he works for a rival family, a family that has been trying to take over our territory for months. They are ruthless, Sophie. They do not follow the same rules we do. They do not care about innocent bystanders. If they find out that you witnessed what happened tonight, they will come for you, not to ask questions, just to tie up loose ends." My blood went cold. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that you are in danger now, whether you like it or not. Not from me, from them. And I am the only one who can protect you." "Why would you do that?" He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, more honest. "Because I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who fear me, people who want things from me, people who see me as a means to an end. But the way you looked at me just now, when you told me about your life, there was no fear, there was no calculation, there was just honesty." He reached out and touched my face, just the lightest brush of his fingers against my cheek. "I have not seen that kind of honesty in a very long time," he said, "and I am not going to let anything happen to it." What happened next was a blur of instructions and arrangements. Dominic called his men back into the study and gave orders in a rapid, commanding voice that left no room for argument. "Sophie is under my protection now," he said. "I want men on her at all times. I want her living situation assessed and secured. I want to know who she talks to, where she goes, what she does. And if anyone from the Romano family comes anywhere near her, I want to know about it immediately." The men nodded and dispersed, and suddenly I was being swept up in a whirlwind of activity that I had no control over. Within an hour, I had been moved out of my tiny apartment and into a guest suite in Dominic's mansion. Within 2 hours, I had been given a new phone, a new wardrobe, and a detailed security briefing from a man named Marcus, who seemed to be Dominic's right hand. "This is insane," I said to Marcus when he finished explaining the detailed protocols for my new life. "I am a waitress from a small Italian restaurant. I serve pasta and pour wine and make small talk with regular customers. I do not need bodyguards and safe houses and encrypted phones like I am some kind of spy or protected witness." Marcus looked at me with something like sympathy in his eyes. "Miss Reyes, with all due respect, you stopped being just a waitress the moment you looked through that warehouse door. Mr. Santoro has made you his responsibility. That means you are now one of the most protected people in this city, whether you like it or not. Your life has changed." I sank down onto the enormous bed in my new room, my head spinning. 12 hours ago, I had been finishing a shift at Marino's, thinking about the book I wanted to read before bed and the laundry I needed to do tomorrow. Now I was living in a mansion, surrounded by armed guards, protected by a man whose name made most people in this city cross the street to avoid him. And the strangest thing was that I did not feel afraid anymore. Somewhere between the warehouse and the study, and the conversation that had happened in between, my carer had transformed into something else, something that felt almost like trust, which was insane. You did not trust men like Dominic Santoro. You feared them, or you worked for them, or you stayed as far away from them as possible. You did not trust them. But as I lay in that enormous bed in that ridiculous mansion, all I could think about was the way he had touched my face, the way he had looked at me like I was something precious, the way he had said, "I am the only one who can protect you," like it was both a promise and a confession. I did not sleep that night. I just lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my entire life had been turned upside down in the space of a few hours. And somewhere around dawn, when the first light was beginning to creep through the heavy curtains, I realized something that scared me almost as much as everything else. I was not thinking about escape. I was not thinking about how to get away from this situation, how to go back to my normal life, how to pretend none of this had ever happened. Instead, I was thinking about Dominic Santoro, about his dark eyes and his commanding presence, and the unexpected gentleness in his voice when he asked if I was hurt, about the way he had listened to my story like it actually mattered to him, about the way he had decided to protect me instead of eliminate me, even though eliminating me would have been the safer choice. I was thinking about him in ways that I definitely should not be thinking about a man who ran a criminal empire and had just witnessed beating someone for information. And I had no idea what that meant for my future. The next few weeks were surreal in ways I could never have imagined. I was not a prisoner in Dominic's mansion, but I was not exactly free either. I could go places, but always with a security detail that followed me everywhere. I could see people, but only after they had been thoroughly vetted by Marcus and his extensive team of investigators. I could work, but Dominic had insisted on buying out Marino's so that Marco could keep running it while I remained a ghost employee, collecting a paycheck without actually showing up and potentially exposing myself to danger. "It is for your safety," Dominic explained when I protested. "The Romano family is actively looking for the witness who saw what happened that night. If you go back to your normal life, they will find you, and when they find you, they will kill you." So instead of going back to my normal life, I stayed in the mansion. I read books from Dominic's impressive library. I explored the gardens. I had long conversations with Marcus about everything, from politics to philosophy to the best places to get pizza in the city. And I spent more and more time with Dominic himself. He sought me out, which surprised me. I would be reading in the library, and he would appear in the doorway, asking if he could join me. I would be eating breakfast in the kitchen, and he would sit down across from me, asking about my night, my dreams, my thoughts. I would be walking in the gardens, and he would fall into step beside me, telling me about the history of the house, the family who had lived here before his grandfather bought it, the memories he had of growing up within these walls. He was different than I expected. The public Dominic Santoro, the one whose name was spoken in whispers, was cold and ruthless and terrifying. But the private Dominic, the one who sat across from me at breakfast and walked beside me in the gardens, was thoughtful and curious and surprisingly gentle. He asked me questions about my life, about my hopes and fears, about the person I wanted to become. He listened to my answers with genuine interest, not the polite attention of someone who was just waiting for their turn to speak. And he shared things about himself, too, about the weight of expectation that came with being the heir to an empire he had never asked to inherit,
about the loneliness of a life where everyone either wanted something from him or feared him, about the choices he had made that he was not proud of, and the ones he would make again in a heartbeat. I should not have been falling for him. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was a terrible idea, that he was a dangerous man in a dangerous world, that whatever was developing between us could only end in disaster. But the heart does not listen to reason, and my heart had already made its decision. One night, about 3 weeks after I had moved into the mansion, I was sitting in the library reading when Dominic found me. He looked tired, more tired than I had ever seen him, and there was tension in his shoulders that spoke of a difficult day. "Long day?" I asked, setting my book aside. He sank into the chair across from me and closed his eyes. "The Romano family made a move tonight. We had to respond." I was quiet, not knowing what to say. I understood by now that responding to a move in Dominic's world meant things that I did not want to think about too closely. "I am sorry," he said suddenly, opening his eyes. "What for?" "For bringing you into this, for making you a part of something you never asked to be a part of, for putting you in danger just by being near you." I studied his face, seeing the genuine remorse there. "You did not bring me into this," I said. "I brought myself into this when I looked through that warehouse door. You're just trying to protect me from the consequences of my own curiosity." He smiled, and it transformed his face into something almost beautiful. "Your own curiosity? That is a very generous way of describing what happened." "It is the truth." I sat forward in my chair, closing the distance between us.
Can I ask you something? Anything. Why me? You could have just let your men make me disappear. It would have been easier, cleaner, less risky. Why did you decide to protect me instead? He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because when I looked at you in that study, when I heard you tell your story, I saw something I had not seen in a very long time." "What?" "Hope," he said simply. "You had every reason to be broken by the life you have lived, but you are not broken. You are surviving. You are fighting. You are finding reasons to keep going, even when everything is against you. And something about that made me want to keep you safe. Not because it was the smart thing to do, not because it served my interests, but because you deserved to be safe. Because you deserved to have someone in your corner for once." I felt tears prick at my eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. No one had ever seen me, really seen me, the way he seemed to see me. "Dominic," I whispered, and I did not know what I was going to say next, but it did not matter because suddenly he was moving, closing the distance between us, pulling me into his arms. He kissed me, and it was nothing like I expected. I had thought that a man like him would be demanding, aggressive, taking what he wanted without asking. But his kiss was gentle, almost tentative, like he was asking a question he was not sure he had the right to ask, and I answered him with everything I had. I do not know how long we stayed like that, wrapped in each other's arms in the dim light of the library, but when we finally pulled apart, both of us breathing hard, something had fundamentally shifted between us. "I cannot offer you a normal life," he said, his forehead resting against mine. "I cannot offer you safety or stability or any of the things a woman like you deserves. All I can offer you is me, and I know that is not enough." I pulled back just far enough to look into his eyes. "Let me decide what is enough," I said, "and I have already decided. Dominic Santoro, dangerous and powerful and feared by half the city, smiled at me like I had just given him the greatest gift of his life. The next few months were the happiest I had ever known, which was strange given the circumstances. I was living in a mansion protected by armed guards. I was in a relationship with a man who ran a criminal empire. I was being hunted by a rival family that wanted to eliminate me as a witness to their enemies' activities. By any reasonable measure, my life was a disaster, but I had never felt more alive. Dominic was unlike anyone I had ever been with before. He was attentive in ways that surprised me, remembering small details about my preferences and going out of his way to make sure I was comfortable. He was protective without being suffocating, giving me space to be myself while making sure I was always safe. And he was passionate in ways that made me forget all the reasons why this relationship was a terrible idea. We fell into a routine, the kind of domestic intimacy that I had never experienced before. Breakfast together every morning, long conversations in the evenings, walks in the gardens, quiet nights in the library reading side by side. He told me about his business, not the violent parts, but the legitimate operations that made up an increasingly large portion of the Santoro empire. He told me about his plans to move the family away from the criminal activities that had defined them for generations, towards something cleaner, something that his future children would not have to be ashamed of. These conversations changed my understanding of who Dominic really was. I had assumed, like everyone else, that men in his position chose their lives, that they embraced the violence and the power and the darkness. But Dominic had not chosen anything. He had been born into this world, raised from infancy to take over the family business, never given the option to be anything else. His father had been brutal in his training. Dominic told me about the lessons he had learned as a child, the punishments for showing weakness, the constant pressure to be harder, colder, more ruthless than anyone around him. He told me about the first time he had to hurt someone, how young he had been, how the act had haunted him for years afterward, even as he learned to hide his feelings behind a mask of indifference. "I used to have nightmares," he admitted one night, his voice barely above a whisper, "about the things I have done, the people I have hurt. I would wake up in a cold sweat, hating myself, hating the person I had become, but I did not know any other way to be." "You could have left," I said, even though I knew it was not that simple. He smiled sadly. "Where would I go? This is all I know. This is the only world where I have ever belonged. Until now, until you." He looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You showed me that there was more to life than this, that I could be more than what my father made me, that it was not too late to change." I wanted to weep for the boy he had been, the boy who had never been given a chance to be anything other than what was expected of him. But I also felt hope, because he was here now, talking to me, dreaming of a different future. And that meant something. That meant everything. And I told him about my dreams, about the art history degree I had never finished, about the museum job I had always imagined having, about the life I had put on hold when my mother got sick and had never quite managed to pick back up again. He listened to all of it with the same intensity he brought to everything, and then, a few weeks later, he did something that took my breath away. He enrolled me in classes at the local university, paying for everything and arranging for security to accompany me without being intrusive. He connected me with curators at museums across the city, setting up internships and informational interviews. He gave me the resources to pursue the life I had always wanted, the life that had seemed impossible before he came into it. "Why are you doing all this?" I asked him one night, overwhelmed by his generosity. We were sitting in the garden, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The question had been building in me for weeks, ever since he had arranged the first meeting with a museum curator. I did not understand what he was getting out of this, what angle he was playing. In my experience, people did not give without expecting something in return. "Because you deserve it," he said simply. "Because watching you chase your dreams is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Because making you happy makes me happy, and I have not been truly happy in longer than I can remember." I stared at him, trying to find the catch, the hidden motive, the strings attached, but there was nothing. Just a man who saw something he wanted to nurture and decided to nurture it. "That is not how the world works," I said slowly. "People do not just do things for other people without wanting something back." "That is how my world works now," he replied. "That is how our world works." He took my hand, his fingers warm and strong around mine. "I have spent my entire life taking things from people," he said. "Money, power, respect. I took whatever I wanted because that was how I was taught to survive. But you have taught me something different. You have taught me that giving can be more satisfying than taking, that building someone up is more rewarding than tearing them down. I want to give you everything, Sophie, not because I expect anything in return, but because giving to you gives me joy." I fell in love with him completely after that, not because of the money or the resources or the security, but because he saw me as a whole person, not just as a witness to be protected or a problem to be solved. He saw who I was and who I wanted to become, and he wanted to help me get there. But happiness in Dominic's world always came with shadows attached, and those shadows were about to catch up with us. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, about 6 months after I had moved into the mansion. I was on my way to class at the university, accompanied by my usual security detail, when everything went wrong. The car I was riding in was ambushed on a quiet street near campus. 3 black SUVs surrounded us, and before my driver could react, men with guns were pouring out and surrounding our vehicle. My security team tried to fight back, but they were outnumbered. Within minutes, they were either dead or incapacitated, and I was being dragged out of the car by men whose faces I did not recognize, but whose intentions I understood perfectly. The Romano family had found me. They took me to a warehouse on the other side of the city, ironically similar to the one where this whole nightmare had begun. They tied me to a chair and left me there for hours, alone in the darkness, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. When someone finally came for me, it was a man I had never seen before. He was older than Dominic, maybe 50, with gray hair and cold eyes that held no warmth at all. He introduced himself as Victor Romano, the head of the family that had been trying to destroy everything Dominic had built. "So you are the witness," he said, walking slowly around my chair. "The woman who saw something she should not have seen. The woman Dominic Santoro has been protecting for months." I did not respond. I was too terrified to speak, too aware of how this story was supposed to end. "You know," Victor continued, "I did not understand at first why Dominic was going to so much trouble to keep you safe. A witness is a problem, and problems should be eliminated, not protected. But then I did some research. I learned about your relationship with him, about how much you mean to him, and suddenly everything made sense." He stopped in front of me, tilting my chin up with one cold finger. "You are not just a witness," he said. "You are his weakness, and now I have you. I'm going to use you to bring Dominic Santoro to his knees, and when I'm done with him, I'm going to make sure you never have the chance to testify about anything, ever again." I sat there in that warehouse for what felt like days, but was probably only hours, waiting for the end that was surely coming. Victor had left me alone after his threat, probably to prepare whatever trap he was setting for Dominic. And I had nothing to do but sit in the darkness and think about all the choices that had led me here. I thought about the night I had looked through that warehouse door, about the moment when I could have turned around and walked away, but did not. About all the decisions, large and small, that had brought me to this moment. And I thought about Dominic, about his dark eyes and his gentle hands and the way he looked at me like I was the most important thing in his world. About the future we had been building together, the life we had been creating out of 2 broken pieces that somehow fit together perfectly. I did not want to die. I wanted to finish my degree and get that museum job and marry Dominic in a ceremony that would probably be wildly inappropriate for a crime family, but would be perfect for us. I wanted to have children with him, to build a family, to grow old together in that ridiculous mansion with its library full of books and its gardens full of flowers. I wanted a future, and Victor Romano was about to take it away from me. But what I did not know, what I could not have known sitting alone in that darkness, was that Dominic Santoro was already coming for me. Later, I would learn what happened on his end, how he received word of the ambush within minutes of it happening, how he mobilized every resource at his disposal, calling in favors, threatening enemies, doing whatever it took to find out where I had been taken, how he led the assault on the Romano warehouse himself, refusing to stay behind while his men did the dangerous work. He came for me. That is the part of the story that still makes me cry when I think about it. Dominic Santoro, the most powerful and feared man in the city, came for me personally. Not because I was a witness who needed protection, not because I was a strategic asset, but because he loved me and he would not let anything happen to the woman he loved. The door of the warehouse exploded inward, and suddenly everything was chaos. Gunfire and shouting, and men in black tactical gear pouring through every entrance. I screamed, not knowing who was who, not knowing if I was being rescued or if this was just a new phase of my nightmare. And then Dominic was there, cutting through the ropes that bound me, pulling me into his arms, holding me so tight I could barely breathe. "I have you," he said into my hair. "I have you, Sophie. You are safe. I am never letting you go again." The battle raged around us, but Dominic's men formed a protective circle, keeping us safe while they systematically dismantled Victor Romano's operation. I clung to Dominic, shaking with fear and relief and 1,000 other emotions I could not name, and he held me through all of it. When it was over, when the last Romano soldier had been neutralized and Victor himself had been taken into custody, Dominic carried me out of that warehouse in his arms. He put me in his car and held my hand the entire drive back to the mansion, and he did not let go of me for hours afterward. That night, lying in his bed with his arms wrapped around me, I asked him the question that had been burning in my mind since the moment he burst through that door. "Why did you come yourself?" I asked. "You could have sent your men. You could have stayed safe." He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because you are mine, Sophie. From the moment I saw you in that study, from the moment I heard your story and saw the strength in your eyes, you were mine, and I protect what is mine with everything I have, even my life." I turned in his arms so I could look at his face. "That is a lot of responsibility to put on a person," I said, "being yours." He reached up and touched my face, the same gentle brush of fingers that I remembered from our first night together. "It is not a responsibility," he said. "It is a promise. I am going to spend the rest of my life keeping you safe, making you happy, giving you everything you deserve. That is not a burden for you. That is a gift for me." We got married 3 months later. Not a big ceremony, despite what I had imagined in that warehouse. Just a small gathering in the gardens of the mansion, with Marcus as Dominic's best man and a woman named Elena who had become my closest friend as my maid of honor. Marco from the restaurant was there, still slightly bewildered by everything that had happened, but happy for me nonetheless. And my mother's ghost was there too, I liked to think, watching her daughter finally find the happiness she had always deserved. The day of our wedding was one of those perfect autumn days when the sky is impossibly blue and the air is crisp and clean and everything feels full of possibility. I wore a simple white dress that I had fallen in love with the moment I saw it, not because it was expensive or impressive, but because it made me feel like myself. And when I walked down the aisle towards Dominic, when I saw the tears in his eyes and the love on his face, I knew that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Our vows were simple too. We did not need elaborate promises or poetic declarations. We just needed each other. "I promise to see you," Dominic said, his voice rough with emotion. "To really see you every day for the rest of our lives. To never let you feel invisible again. To remind you whenever you forget that you are the most extraordinary person I have ever known." "And I promise to stay," I said back. "To stay when things are hard. To stay when I am afraid. To stay when every instinct tells me to run. Because the life we are building together is worth staying for. It is worth fighting for. It is worth everything." When the officiant pronounced us married, when Dominic kissed me in front of everyone we loved, I felt something settle into place inside me. A peace I had never known before. A certainty that I was finally home. Dominic kept every promise he had made to me. Over the next few years, he systematically moved the Santoro family away from their criminal roots and toward legitimate business operations. It was not easy, and there were setbacks along the way, but he was determined to build something clean for our future. There were people who did not want him to change, of course. Old allies who benefited from the way things had always been done. Rivals who saw his transition to legitimacy as a sign of weakness. But Dominic faced them all with the same determination he had shown when he decided to protect me instead of eliminate me. He had made his choice, and he was not going to be deterred from it. One night, maybe 2 years into our marriage, I found him in the library, staring at old photographs of his father and grandfather. He looked troubled in a way I had not seen in a long time. "What is wrong?" I asked, sitting beside him. "I was thinking about legacy," he said, "about what I inherited and what I will pass on. My father taught me that this life, this world, was the only way, that weakness got you killed and sentiment was for fools. And I believed him for so long. What changed?" He looked at me, and his eyes were soft with love. "You did. You showed me that there was another way, that strength could come from love instead of fear, that building something good was more satisfying than destroying what other people had built. I want our children to be proud of me," he continued. "I want them to know that their father built something worth having, not through violence and intimidation, but through hard work and integrity. I want them to never have to make the choices I had to make." "And they will not," I said, taking his hand, "because you are changing things. Because you are breaking the cycle, because you are giving them a different legacy." He pulled me close and held me for a long time, and I could feel the weight of generations lifting from his shoulders. He was not going to be defined by what his father and grandfather had been. He was going to be defined by who he chose to become. I finished my degree and got a job at the city's Natural History Museum, working my way up from entry-level assistant to junior curator within 2 years. Every morning, I would kiss my husband goodbye and go to work surrounded by art and history and beauty. And every evening, I would come home to a man who looked at me like I was the most precious thing in his world. We had children, too. Twin boys first, dark-haired and dark-eyed like their father, with tempers to match. Then a daughter, quieter and more contemplative, with my nose and her father's intensity. The mansion that had once felt like a gilded cage became a home, filled with laughter and chaos and more love than I had ever dreamed possible. I want to tell you about the moment I knew that everything had truly changed, that we had built something real and lasting out of what had started as danger and fear. It was about 2 years after our wedding, and I was pregnant with Lucia. The twins were 3 years old, and they were absolute terrors in the best possible way. That particular afternoon, I was sitting in the garden watching them chase each other around the fountain, while Dominic talked business with Marcus on the other side of the lawn. It was an ordinary moment, the kind of moment that happens 100 times without anyone noticing. But something made me really see it, see the life we had created, see the man my husband had become. Dominic was laughing, not the polite, measured chuckle he used in business situations, but a real laugh, his whole face transformed with joy. One of the twins, Marco, had abandoned his game with his brother and run over to his father, demanding to be picked up, and Dominic had scooped him into his arms without hesitation, without even pausing his conversation, like holding his son was the most natural thing in the world. I watched him standing there, this man who had once been feared by half the city, bouncing a toddler on his hip while discussing supply chain logistics with his right-hand man. And I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as wonder. This was not the man I had met in that warehouse. That man had been cold and controlled and isolated by the weight of his responsibilities. This man was warm and open and connected. He had let himself be changed by love, by family, by the life we were building together.
He caught me watching him and smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still made my heart skip. He said something to Marcus and then crossed the garden toward me, still carrying Marco. "You look happy," he said, sitting down beside me. I am happy, I said, happier than I ever thought I could be. He reached over and took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. Do you remember what you said to me that first night when I asked you why I should trust you? I shook my head. It was all such a blur. You said that you had survived everything life had thrown at you by learning to be invisible, by making yourself small so that no one would notice you, by building walls so high that nothing could touch you. I remembered then, the conversation in the study, the honesty that had surprised us both. You said I should not have to be invisible anymore, he continued. You said that I deserved to be seen, to be known, to be loved for exactly who I was. Do you know that you gave me the same gift? I looked at him, not understanding. You saw me, Sophie, not the name or the reputation or the power. You saw me, the lonely man behind all of it, the person who was drowning in a life he never chose. You saw me and you loved me anyway, and that made me want to become someone worthy of being seen. His eyes were bright with emotion, and I felt tears prick at my own. I spent my whole life thinking that love was a weakness, he said, something that enemies could exploit, something that made you vulnerable. But loving you, loving our children, it does not make me weak. It makes me stronger than I have ever been, because now I have something worth fighting for, something worth changing for, something worth being better for. Marco, bored with the adult conversation, squirmed down from his father's arms and ran back to his brother. But Dominic did not let go of my hand. He just sat there with me in the garden, watching our sons play, feeling the life growing inside me and being present in a way that I knew did not come naturally to him. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For looking through that warehouse door, for being curious when you should have been afraid, for seeing something you should not have seen and trusting me anyway, for giving me this life. I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him, the solidity of him, the love that radiated from him like heat from a fire. I would do it all again, I said. Every terrifying moment, every sleepless night, I would do it all again to end up here, with you. And through it all, I never forgot how it had started. The warehouse, the witness, the man who had looked at his men and said 5 words that had changed my entire life. Keep her safe, she's mine. Those words had started as a command, a statement of possession, but over the years they had transformed into something else entirely. They had become a promise, a declaration, a foundation for everything we built together. Because Dominic did keep me safe. Every single day, in 1,000 small ways, he kept me safe. Not just from the physical dangers of his world, but from the emotional dangers too. From the loneliness that had defined my life before him, from the fear that had kept me small and invisible, from the belief that I did not deserve to be seen and known and loved. He kept me safe by seeing me, by knowing me, by loving me exactly as I was, and I kept him safe too, in my own way, safe from the isolation that had been slowly killing him, safe from the belief that he was not capable of change, safe from the darkness that had threatened to consume him. We saved each other. That is the truth of our story. Not that he rescued me from danger, though he did, not that I gave him a reason to be better, though I did, but that we found each other at exactly the right moment when we both needed something we did not know we were looking for, and we built something together that neither of us could have built alone. Sometimes I would catch Dominic looking at me across the breakfast table or the garden or the library, and I would see in his eyes the same thing I had seen that first night: wonder, gratitude, disbelief that someone like me could love someone like him. And I would remember that I was not the only one who had been saved by what happened between us. Dominic had been drowning in a life he had never chosen, surrounded by fear and violence and loneliness. I had given him something he thought he would never have: a partner, a home, a reason to become something better than what he had been born to be. We saved each other, I said to him one night, years after everything, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet. He smiled at me, that rare, genuine smile that still made my heart skip after all this time. "We saved each other," he agreed, "and I would do it all again. Every terrifying moment, every sleepless night, every battle and fear and risk, I would do it all again to end up here, with you." If you are listening to this story and wondering what it means for your own life, I want to tell you something. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually the beginning of something beautiful.
Sometimes the thing we fear most turns out to be the thing we needed all along. Sometimes witnessing something we should not witness leads us to exactly where we are supposed to be. But before I end this story, there is one more thing I need to tell you about. Something that happened just last year that brought everything full circle in a way I never expected. It was a Thursday evening, and I was at home with the children while Dominic was at a business meeting downtown. The twins were playing in the garden, and our daughter, Lucia, was sitting with me in the library, reading a book that was probably too advanced for her age, but that she insisted on trying anyway. My phone rang, and when I looked at the screen, I saw Marcus's name. This was not unusual. Marcus called me regularly to check in, to coordinate security, to discuss scheduling. But when I answered, his voice was different than I had ever heard it. "Sophie, you need to come to St. Mary's Hospital, right now." My blood went cold. "Dominic? Is it Dominic? Is he okay?" "Just come," Marcus said. "I will explain everything when you get here." The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I called my neighbor to watch the children and drove to the hospital at speeds that were definitely illegal, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my mind racing through every terrible possibility. When I burst through the emergency room doors, Marcus was waiting for me. He grabbed my arm and started leading me through the corridors, talking fast. "There was an incident at the meeting," he said. "Someone from an old rival family, someone we thought was no longer a threat. They had a grudge, they had a gun, He stopped outside a door and his face crumpled. "Sophie, I am so sorry. I do not have words for what I felt in that moment. Terror, disbelief, a grief so overwhelming it threatened to swallow me whole. I pushed past Marcus and through the door, already knowing what I would find, already feeling my heart shattering into a million pieces. But what I found was not what I expected. Dominic was sitting up in a hospital bed, his arm in a sling, his face pale but very much alive. And sitting next to him, holding his hand, was a young woman I had never seen before. She looked up when I entered, and I saw tears streaming down her face. And then Dominic saw me, and his whole body seemed to sag with relief. "Sophie," he said, his voice rough, "thank God you are here. I need you to meet someone. This is Isabella. She is my daughter." The world tilted on its axis. I stood there frozen, trying to process what he had just said, while this young woman, who was apparently my husband's daughter, stared at me with eyes that were unmistakably the same shade of dark brown as his. "I do not understand," I managed to say. Dominic closed his eyes for a moment, and I could see the pain on his face, both physical and emotional. "Before you," he said slowly, "before I met you, I had a relationship with a woman named Maria. It was brief, and it ended badly. She moved away, and I never heard from her again. I did not know that she was pregnant when she left. I did not know that I had a daughter until 3 days ago, when Isabella found me. I looked at this young woman, really looked at her, and I could see the truth written in every line of her face. She had Dominic's cheekbones, Dominic's intensity, Dominic's way of holding herself like she was ready to face whatever came next. She is 23 years old," Dominic continued. "Her mother died 6 months ago, and she found papers that led her to me. She has been trying to work up the courage to introduce herself, and tonight," his voice broke, "tonight she was at the restaurant where I was having my meeting. She saw what happened. She saw me get shot, and she ran to help me. She saved my life, Sophie. A stranger who I did not even know was my daughter saved my life." The irony of it was not lost on either of us. 23 years ago, Dominic had been a young man making choices he did not fully understand the consequences of. And now, all these years later, the consequence of one of those choices had saved his life. It was like the universe had been keeping score the whole time, waiting for exactly the right moment to balance the books.
I looked at Isabella, and she looked at me, and in that moment, something passed between us, an understanding, a recognition. We were both women who had been shaped by Dominic Santoro in different ways, women who loved him in different ways, women who would do anything to protect him. I could have been angry, I could have felt betrayed that Dominic had never mentioned this relationship from his past, that there was something so significant he had kept from me. But looking at this young woman, seeing the fear and hope in her eyes, I could not find any anger. All I could feel was compassion. She had grown up without a father, she had lost her mother, she had traveled across the country to find a man she did not know, hoping that he would be willing to acknowledge her. And then she had watched that man get shot, had thrown herself into danger to help him without even knowing if he would want her help.
That took courage. That took the kind of strength that I recognized from my own story. I do not expect anything, Isabella said quickly, her voice shaking. I know you have your own family. I know I am an outsider. I just needed to meet him. I needed to know who my father was. I needed to understand where I came from. I crossed the room and sat down on the edge of Dominic's bed, taking his uninjured hand in mine. Then I looked at Isabella and said the words that would change all of our lives. You are not an outsider, I said. You are family, and family stays together. The look on her face when I said those words is something I will never forget. It was like watching someone who'd been holding their breath for years finally exhale, like watching someone who'd been standing alone in the cold finally step into warmth. She started crying, and I started crying, and even Dominic, tough and controlled Dominic, had tears streaming down his face. That night in the hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and sterile walls, a new family was born. Not the family we had planned, not the family we had expected, but a family nonetheless. And is that not how the best families are formed? Through unexpected moments and grace and the willingness to make room for people we never knew we needed. The recovery was long, but Dominic is strong. The bullet had hit his shoulder, missing anything vital by inches. The doctors said he was lucky, and I suppose he was, but I prefer to think that something else was at work. Fate, maybe, or the universe looking out for a man who had spent his whole life looking out for others. Isabella became part of our family that night. Not all at once, not without complications and difficult conversations and moments of awkwardness, but she fit with us in a way that seemed almost predestined. She moved into the mansion, took over some of the business operations that Dominic had been handling alone, and became the big sister my children had always wanted. The twins adored her immediately, dragging her into their games and their arguments and their endless negotiations over bedtime. Lucia was more cautious, but eventually she warmed up too, and now the two of them are inseparable. And Dominic, well, Dominic got to be a father in a way he had never experienced before. He got to know the young woman his daughter had become, to learn about the life she had lived, to make up for all the years he had missed. It was healing for both of them, and watching their relationship develop was one of the most beautiful things I have ever witnessed. But the thing that surprised me most was what Isabella taught me about my own story. One night, about 6 months after she joined our family, Isabella and I were sitting in the library together. Dominic was putting the children to bed, and we had a rare moment of quiet. "Can I ask you something?" Isabella said. "Of course." "How did you do it? How did you walk into this world, this family, this life that must have seemed so dangerous and foreign, and make it yours?" I thought about the question for a long time before I answered. "I did not walk in," I finally said. "I fell in. I stumbled through a door I should not have opened, and I witnessed something I was never supposed to see, and everything changed." She nodded slowly. "That is kind of what happened to me, too. I was just trying to find my father. I was not trying to find a whole new family. I was not trying to become part of something so much bigger than myself. But here I am." "Here you are," I agreed. "And here's the thing I have learned. We do not always choose the moments that change our lives. Sometimes they choose us. The important thing is what we do after they happen, whether we run away from them or lean into them, whether we let fear control us or let love guide us." She was quiet for a moment, processing. "You love him a lot," she said. It was not a question.
I love him more than I ever thought I could love anyone, I admitted. He's complicated and demanding and sometimes infuriating. He has a past that would scare most people away, but he is also the most loyal, protective, and genuinely good man I have ever known. He would die for the people he loves. He almost did. I know he is not perfect. I know this life is not normal, but it is ours, and I would not trade it for anything. Isabella smiled, and it was her father's smile, rare and genuine and transformative. I am glad he found you, she said, or that you found each other, I guess. Either way, I am glad. So am I said. So am I. Now, sitting here 10 years after that night in the alley, I can see the full picture of what my life has become. I have a husband who loves me more than anything in the world. I have 3 children who drive me crazy and fill my heart with joy in equal measure. I have a stepdaughter who has become one of my closest friends. I have a career that fulfills me, a home that shelters me, and a purpose that guides me. And I have a story that I carry with me everywhere I go. The story of a girl who witnessed something she should not have witnessed, and a man who told his men 5 words that changed everything. Keep her safe. She's mine.
Sometimes I think about that girl, the one who walked down the alley and looked through the warehouse door, the one who was so afraid and so alone, who thought her life was never going to amount to anything more than survival. I wish I could go back and tell her what was coming. I wish I could show her the future that was waiting for her, just on the other side of her fear. But I also know that she needed to walk through that fear to get here. She needed to witness what she witnessed, to be captured and protected and loved. She needed to learn that sometimes the most dangerous paths lead to the safest destinations. I walked down an alley one night and saw something terrible, and because of that, I found love. I found purpose. I found a family and a future that I never could have imagined in my wildest dreams. Life does not always work out the way we plan. Sometimes it works out better. I know that now. I know that the universe has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be, even when the path there is terrifying. I know that danger can lead to safety, and fear can lead to love, and witnessing something we should not see can lead to being seen more completely than we ever thought possible. My name is Sophie Santoro now. I am a wife, a mother, a curator, a survivor. I am someone who walked through the fire and came out the other side holding the hand of the man who saved me, and I am proof that even the darkest nights can lead to the brightest mornings. If you are in your darkest night right now, if you are afraid and alone and wondering if things will ever get better, I want you to know that they can. I want you to know that hope is always possible, even when it seems impossible. I want you to know that the person who will change your life might be waiting just around the corner, in the place you least expect to find them. Keep going, keep hoping, keep believing that something better is coming, because it is. I promise you, it is. And one more thing. If you ever find yourself walking down a dark alley, if you ever hear voices you should probably ignore, if you ever feel that irresistible pull of curiosity dragging you towards something dangerous and unknown, well, maybe do not do what I did. Maybe turn around and go the other way. But if you do not, if you look through that door anyway, know that it might just be the beginning of the greatest adventure of your life. It was for me. It could be for you too. You just have to be brave enough to see what happens next. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please consider supporting me so I can keep creating more stories like this one. Thank you so much for your time and for listening until the end. On the screen, you can see 2 other stories that I think you will love. There is so much more on my channel. Do not forget to subscribe. I will see you in the next story. With love and respect.